Hi, good morning everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join us. My name is Steve Ledzian. I'm a System Engineering Manager at FireEye here in Asia. And today I'd like to talk to you about cybersecurity, specifically advanced threats and APT defense. Now, if we look at what's happened over the last year, there's been a number of very large companies who have had very public, very high-profile breaches. These breaches have cost companies money, and these companies are not small companies who have had these breaches. They're very large companies. And you have to understand, certainly these large companies have a layered security defense in place. So as we heard Doug ask the question this morning, it's a very good question. Why is this happening? And how is this happening? And the second question we might want to ask ourselves is, what can we do differently? What can we do to better protect our networks and our organizations and our corporations against these types of cyber attacks? How can we reimagine security? So let's start at the beginning. Today, annually, companies are spending over $16 billion a year on traditional security infrastructure. This is things like next-generation firewalls, IPS devices, web security gateways, cloud-based security, and endpoint antivirus solutions. And despite that significant investment, and it is a significant investment, attacks are still getting through. So how is that happening? Well, as we move our lives to be more digitized, there's more digital assets. The digital assets have grown in volume, and they've grown in value. And these digital assets are targets. And the attackers are very motivated to obtaining these digital assets. They've advanced their game as well. Their sophistication has increased, their motivation has increased, and really, if you look at what the attackers are doing against the traditional security defenses, the attackers are winning. Now, these traditional defenses used to work for us. They used to work well, but today they're not. So what's changed? Well, a number of things have changed. First, the attackers themselves have changed. It used to be the case that maybe 20 years ago that the attacker was a lone teenager in the basement trying to show the world how smart he was by defacing a large corporate website. It was about ego and it was about bragging rights. But today, it couldn't be more different. Today, we have an entire criminal ecosystem around these cyber threats. We have organizations which research the vulnerabilities and develop the exploits. That research is passed on to other organizations which purchase it and use it to attack and infiltrate and build botnets of machines. And those botnets are rented out to do DDoS and spam-based attacks. In addition to that, we have nation-state threat actors. Today, nations are arming themselves both with offensive and defensive cyber capability. So it's very different, the adversary that we were facing 20 years ago versus the adversary we're facing today. Secondly, the nature of malware itself has changed. And this probably is the key point of all of these four. This point is the key point. Today, how do most of the traditional security defenses work? First, we have to recognize a threat. Once we witness that threat, we recognize it, we characterize it, turn it into a signature, and now if that threat ever comes back, we have a way to protect ourselves. Well, that's a problem, because the attackers have figured out if they just increase the rate with which they develop and modify malware, they can outpace our reaction to recognizing and characterizing those threats. Think back to your antivirus 20 years ago. How often did your antivirus need to update? Maybe once a week. And then 10 years ago, maybe a few times a week. And today, more than once a day, antivirus needs to pull down the list of here are all the threats that we know about. Well, what about the threats that we don't know about? Well, those will come later when we see them. That's the problem. We're vulnerable to unknown threats. Even today, where antivirus is updating multiple times a day, it can't keep up with the rate with which new threats and new variants of threats are attacking us. Thirdly, we're getting attacked on all angles. We're getting attacked through email, through spear phishing. Many organizations have taken a proactive approach in trying to educate their employees, don't open email attachments from people you don't know. Well, today, these email spear phishing attacks are very sophisticated. What we do is the attacker will go to target a corporation. Today, most corporations will have a web page, and on that web page will be a careers section. On that careers section are jobs that the company is hiring for. The attacker will pick one of those jobs and build a resume for that job, and in that resume, they'll place some malware, and they'll send it to the HR department. Can you train your HR department not to open that resume for which is posted on your website and for which is a job that you're trying to fill? Probably not, right? So the attacker is very clever. We also have threats on the website, drive-by downloads. Today, we see attacks where social engineering attacks, where you go to a web page and you see a pop-up that says, your computer is slow. We can help you. Download our antivirus tool. We'll clean and speed up your computer. Well, in fact, that's not an antivirus tool. That in itself is malware. And so when the user downloads that package, they're infecting themselves. But today, with drive-by downloads, the attacks can be more sophisticated. You don't have to download anything at all. Simply viewing the web page is enough to infect you. One mouse click, one page view, and you're infected, such that an attacker somewhere in the world has full control of your machine. And then we've got file-based attacks as well. We have communications through USB and other removable media, and that can place latent malware sitting on our file server. So we need to address that as well. So we're getting attacked on all angles. And thirdly, the attacks are now multi-stage. A lot of the attacks, it's too difficult to break in. We have so many perimeter defenses. It's too difficult to directly break in. Instead, what the attackers will do is they will send an email with maybe a malicious attachment or a malicious link. That, of course, email is allowed through the organization. That email, the attachment in the email, will exploit a vulnerability in some application on the endpoint that it lands on. That vulnerability will then go out and fetch a full malware set. And then the third stage, once the machine is infected, is to call back to a command and control server. And that's an outbound communication. And that outbound communication looks like any other web traffic. So it's very hard to distinguish. It's hidden in other web traffic. And of course, most companies allow outbound web traffic. But that outbound connection establishes a two-way communication. And that two-way communication allows the attacker to then interactively attack the machine. And I'll show you a demonstration of this in a little while. The short of it is, those traditional defenses, whether we're talking about next generation firewall, whether we're talking about IPS, whether we're talking about endpoint protection, they're all largely signature-based. Okay? And the signature-based fall into the problem where we can't keep up with identifying all the variety and all the variants of malware. And so these advanced attacks are coming right through all of those security solutions which are built on this same signature-based foundation. Today, the attacks are not being stopped. So now ask yourself a question. How often? Right? You can understand technically how this happens, but how often does this happen? Here's the answer. And this is not a marketing answer. This is a measured answer. When FireEye engages with customers, and when we do BMTs with customers, we see that 98% of the companies we work with are compromised. That's placing FireEye after all of the traditional security defenses, after firewall, after IPS, And only when those solutions say it's clean does FireEye have the opportunity to see the traffic. And when we see that traffic, 98% of the time, there's threats in that traffic. And in fact, on average, 22% of those threats are APT threats. And for APAC, it's closer to 40%. Okay, so in this part of the world, we have a serious problem with these threats. Now let's drill down a little bit deeper. We heard Doug this morning talk about countries targeted by APTs. And this is from a report that FireEye will release in the next day or two. It's our advanced threat report, and you'll be able to download it off our website. And in that report, we'll talk about Korea being the second most targeted country in the world when it comes to APT threats. And what's key here, and I think what was shown in the video that we just watched, is when you get infected, it's not an IT operational issue. It's not my machine is slow. It's not I can't work because I have pop-ups. It's someone stealing your business data to compete against you. It's a business problem, okay, and it needs to be addressed at the highest levels of business. And we see this happening in the headlines and in the news every day. You don't even have to go to the technology section of your newspaper. These attacks are making headline news. And again, let's not think that this is a problem specific to the US. This is a global problem. These attacks are coming to and from every industrialized nation. In fact, in Korea, we've seen some of the largest attacks happening. Right? So most recently, we saw data loss with a number of credit card companies in Korea that affected 40% of the Korean population. And a few years ago, we saw an attack through malware that affected 70% of the Korea population. So these attacks are very relevant right here in Korea. And let's look at the most recent data loss with the credit cards. Now, what's important here is the type of data that was stolen. We see names, phone numbers, email and residential addresses, even salaries was part of the data that was exposed. Now, what might not be entirely obvious, other than the inconvenience of having to change your credit card number, what might not be entirely obvious is that this information enables further attacks. We can see who the leaders are in organizations and target them. We have information on them. We have their names, their addresses. That information can be turned into a targeted spearfish and used to further infiltrate and infect individuals and organizations. And again, in the world, across the world, we see these attacks happening all the time. In the US, one company, it's estimated, has lost $200 million to replace the cost of replacing credit cards. Their market cap has dropped in the measurement of billions of dollars, not to mention brand reputation, customer confidence. These are all business impact issues when you get infected with this advanced malware. Now, I think a lot of security vendors come and they talk about threats and they educate audiences about threats, but very rarely do you get the opportunity to see what one of these threats actually looks like. And so what I would like to show you is a quick demonstration, and it's not a demonstration of a FireEye product or a FireEye technology, it's a demonstration of a threat. So you can understand just how easy it is for these attackers to infect machines and what they're capable of once the machines are infected. So here I have two machines. This machine is the attacking machine. And remember, when I say attacking machine, It's not trying to break into the network. It's instead sending an email, letting that email infect the machine. The machine then will make an outbound connection to a command and control server. So this machine that you see here is the command and control server. Right now, it's not controlling any machines at all. The list is empty. And we can say this machine could be anywhere in the world. Let's say, for example, it's in Russia. We also have the victim machine. And the victim machine is here in Korea. Now let's look at how the attack starts. And what I'm going to do is use the example that I gave earlier of the attacker who went to a corporate website, went to the careers section, found a job, built a resume for that job, and sent it to HR. But of course, that resume is a weaponized resume. So here's the resume. This is Erwin's resume, and it's a Microsoft Office file. This is a real Microsoft Office file. It's not an executable posing to be a document, right? Documents shouldn't be able to execute code on your computer, but the malware in this document allows it. When the victim opens the attachment, what they will see is a resume. And from their point of view, there's nothing unusual or nothing suspicious happening on this machine. They can finish reading the resume, they can close it, and they can close the email. But already, the malware has infected the machine. And you can see on the attacker, now there's a victim. So what happened? Well, in that document was an exploit. And that exploit was attacking a vulnerability or a bug, a security bug, inside of Microsoft Word. And that bug allowed that document to execute code, which documents shouldn't be able to do. And the code that it executed was a very small, simple amount of code. Pull down a full set of malware and further infect this machine. Once the machine was infected, the machine called back out to the command and control server. Now let's see what the attacker can do with this infected machine. Let's say, for example, we have some confidential information, maybe a schematic, a design, that we've spent many years and many millions of dollars putting research into. The attacker has access to the file system on the infected machine. And so here I have the local hard drive, which is the hard drive on the attacking machine, and I'm just going to navigate to the desktop. And we have the remote hard drive, and this is the hard drive of the victim machine in Korea. And again, I'm going to navigate to the desktop. To steal that information out of Korea and into Russia, it's just drag and drop. Watch in the corner here. That's it. I've stolen information off the machine. And again, from the endpoint user, nothing unusual is happening, right? Now, what did this end user do wrong? They didn't do anything wrong, really. It's an HR person. The HR person's job is to open resumes. This was a resume for which she knew the company was hiring for. It was a targeted attack. What else can the attacker do? Well, there's actually a lot more that the attacker is capable of. The attacker can also turn on keylogger. So let's say this end user is a smart end user, and they've protected their document with some password protection. As they type in the password, that password is recorded by the attacker. Now imagine that this machine is the machine of your marketing director, and your marketing director is updating the Twitter page or Facebook page of the company. The attacker now has the username and password for those sites. You can deface those sites, post other things onto those sites. Imagine this is your database administrator. The attacker now has additional credentials with which they can spread laterally and attack higher value targets in your organization. Imagine it's your Active Directory administrator, right? The possibilities are endless. What else can the attacker do? Well, the attacker can open a command shell. Now this is C:, but it's C: on the victim machine. So for example, if I run notepad, notepad.exe, the notepad opens on the victim machine. So what happens if I do this? Okay. Format C:. I'm going to erase the hard drive on the victim machine. I can cover my tracks. I can be destructive. What else can the attacker do? The attacker can do a screen capture. And this is a real-time screen capture of what's happening on the victim machine. So it's as if the attacker is standing behind the victim, looking over the shoulder, and watching everything they do on that victim machine. What else can the attacker do? Well, it may be hard to see, but what does this look like? It looks like a webcam. The attacker can actually connect to the victim's webcam. And they can actually see the victim that they're attacking. Okay? Now that's the capability of malware today. And that's the type of threat that we're talking about today when we talk about advanced threats. And remember, all of that capability is possible simply because this victim opened the wrong email attachment. They didn't surf bad sites. They didn't open something from someone they didn't know. This was a job that the company was hiring for. The end user really didn't do anything wrong. Yet they're infected to this extent where the attacker can do almost anything they like to that end user machine, and the attacker can be in a totally different country. That's the capability of advanced malware today. So let's return to our presentation. I think we understand the threat demo now, or the threat landscape. Now the question is, well, what can we do about it? What can we do to address this problem? What can we do to help make sure that we aren't victims like the other companies we've seen in the news and headlines? Well, the core problem we need to address is signatures. The whole technology issue at hand is that signature-based technology can't keep up. It only protects us against threats for which we know. Right? It's a list of known threats. So we want a solution that's signatureless, that doesn't require any previous learning or any previous information. We want it to be real-time. Just take the traffic and tell me if it's a threat or not. We don't want to base on previous knowledge. And the way we achieve this is through a virtualized technology. So again, if we look at the current way of doing detection, our IPS is signature-based. IPS especially is problematic because we have very high false positive rate. Our antivirus, of course, is signature-based. And our web gateways are just gateway versions of antivirus. Right? They're doing signature-based detection as well, only they're doing it in the network instead of on the endpoint. So what do we do differently? Well, FireEye has a technology called MVX. And this is a virtual machine-based model of detection. So instead of taking a traffic sample and comparing it against many different signatures and saying, does that traffic sample meet the signature? What we do is take that same traffic sample and we put it into a virtual machine and we run it. And if that traffic sample infects the virtual machine and there's malicious behavior, we'll see it. We'll see it happening inside of that virtual machine. And that virtual machine-based detection doesn't require any previous learning. It doesn't require any signature. Just run it, let it happen, and see if the machine gets infected. Let me draw an analogy for you. In ancient times, we were ruled by kings. And the kings had this problem with assassins. The assassins would try and poison the kings. And so how could the king make sure that his food was safe? Well, he could take a small piece of the food, put it into a test tube, run an experiment, run a test on it, and make sure it's safe. That might be a good way, but what if that test was a test, or what if the poison in that food was a poison which that test wouldn't recognize? It's a new type of poison, and the test only recognizes the old types of poison. Well, then we have a problem. So what could we do differently? Well, the king, instead of testing the food, could have a food taster. And the food taster could be another person to taste the food, and if the food is poison, the food taster will die. It doesn't matter what type of poison it is. New poison, old poison, seen before, not seen before. And that's what FireEye is doing. We have essentially a virtual victim. We let that virtual victim get infected, and we let that infection be evidence of whether or not the traffic sample is malicious. Okay? It's a much more reliable means of detection, and it allows us to detect both known and, more importantly, unknown threats. So now we break this cycle of having to constantly keep up our signature database with multiple updates every day and still not have it be enough. We remove that dependency on signatures. Now we take this engine, this virtual execution engine, and we apply it across the attack vectors that I mentioned previously. Let's look at the web traffic to make sure that our end users are not browsing sites which are serving advanced threats. Take MVX, use MVX to monitor web traffic. Let's look at our email traffic, our attachments, and the links in email messages, and make sure that none of those are unknown threats which would bypass signatures. We can use MVX now to detect threats which we could never see before. Let's use MVX to crawl our file servers in the data center and make sure there's no latent malware that was installed through a USB or other removable media. And lastly, mobile. Let's use MVX to make sure the apps that we install on our mobile devices are not malicious. Now the platform, most of the platform is appliance-based, and this is very important. The appliance that we install, I mentioned before the statistics with the BMT that we do with customers. That installation only takes 1 or 2 hours. This is not a very troublesome installation process where we have to touch many different machines and it takes hours of integration, hours of configuration. We install in 2 hours, very, very quickly, in the network perimeter. Other customers say, I want to make sure that the analysis that I do is on-premise. I don't want to do analysis in the cloud because the whole point is to protect my files and make sure that I'm not losing data. And if you're telling me I need to send my data out to the cloud to protect it, that seems backwards. So I want on-premise detection and analysis, and the appliance model fits that. And lastly, customers say, when I do a BMT, I want to do BMT on my production environment, my live environment, because I want to know what unknown threats are coming in my live environment. But I don't want to disrupt, and I don't want to take risk when I do the BMT. So how can we make the BMT safe? Well, the answer is we can deploy in 2 different modes. We have a monitoring mode and an inline mode. For BMT, we deploy in monitoring mode. Okay? And it's just send us a copy of the data. It's very safe. Once you understand the product, once you have confidence in the product, we can move to inline mode. And the advantage of inline mode is blocking. So now, not only can we detect these threats, now we can block them before they get in. So MVX comes across a number of different platforms, comes across web, email, file, and mobile. And across each one of those, we have series of devices. So we can size the device to be right for your environment. If it's a small branch office, we have solutions that will fit that sizing. If it's a very large environment that needs multi-gigabit throughput, we have multi-gigabit devices that can do the inspection and detection. Now, if we look at the platform portfolio, later, as the day moves on, there'll be additional tracks. In those tracks, we'll do a deep dive of each one of the platforms, but I just want to give you a high-level view of what the platform portfolio is, because FireEye really is a platform for doing this advanced threat detection and protection. So we have a platform for network-based threats. This is going to include web, but of course threats aren't limited to just web traffic. So we want to monitor the perimeter, and that's our NX series appliance. We want to monitor email, and that's our EX series appliance. We want to monitor file content in the data center to make sure there's no latent malware. That's our FX series. We want to do detection on the endpoint, and I'll talk about that in a moment. That's our HX series. We need central management to coordinate across all of these. We need dynamic threat intelligence, or DTI, which takes FireEye's global visibility and global knowledge and pushes it down to each one of these areas to make these solutions more effective. We also have a version of the email solution in the cloud, if you prefer cloud-based. A lot of SMB organizations will want a cloud or OpEx-based deployment. Our mobile threat prevention is also in the cloud. And we have a solution called TAP, Threat Analytics Platform, which allows us to take all of your logs, which sounds like a SIM, but this isn't necessarily a SIM. Take all of your logs, send it to the cloud, and compare it against FireEye intelligence. What are the things that FireEye knows about attacks? Let's look in your logs and see if we can find evidence of those threats. In addition, we integrate well. The FireEye platform integrates well with third-party vendors. Remember, you've already spent over $16 billion on security infrastructure. You want to leverage that infrastructure. You want to make it more useful. Well, FireEye integrates with endpoint, mitigation, analysis, SIM devices. And what we can do is use FireEye as the platform for detection, share that intelligence that's happening real-time in your environment with those other third-party solutions to make your defense in depth strategy more robust. Now, at the start of the year, we acquired a company called Mandiant. I'm not sure if you've heard of Mandiant before. We'll have a session later that focuses on Mandiant, but I'll just talk about Mandiant for one quick minute. Mandiant's a company that other companies hire when they're breached. When the worst has happened and an attacker has gotten inside, there's going to be some questions. The questions are going to be, how long has this attacker been in my network? Where in my network did this attacker spread to? What areas did they get access to? What did they steal? And lastly, who's attacking me? These are very hard questions to answer. They're not easy. And Mandiant is the best company in the world at answering those questions. That's why FireEye acquired Mandiant. So companies that engaged Mandiant, when they were breached, what they saw was Mandiant would come with just a small amount of people, 4 or 5 people, and within a very short period of time, they would have the answers to those questions. And they said, Mandiant, tell us how you do this, because the other incident response firms that we're hiring, they send 30 people, and it takes them 3 months to get the answers, if they get those answers at all. How are you able to get these answers so quickly with so little resources? And the answer is the tool set that Mandiant uses is very good. And so the customers came back and said, well, we would like to buy the tools that you use. And so Mandiant started, in addition to providing incident response services, started selling their tool sets. And now those tool sets, those commercial tool sets, are part of the FireEye solution as well. So here's a little bit on services. Excuse me. We have what's called a managed defense service. The managed defense service, some customers have a concern where they say, FireEye, we understand your products, we love your products, we want to be able to detect unknown threats, but we don't have the in-house capability to look at alerts and to really understand what these alerts are about. Maybe, for example, it's a legal firm. Legal firm doesn't want to hire a security analyst inside of their organization. Well, FireEye can manage those security products for you. And that's part of what we call a managed defense service. Of course, we have services around products and support, and Mandiant brings their own services as well. Primarily, their incident response service. What happens when you get breached? Who do you call for help? They have proactive services as well for penetration and breach testing. And they have strategic consulting services. So if you're building a SOC, or maybe your SOC isn't performing to the level you expect it to be, Mandiant has done this hundreds of times. They can come and get your security program on the right track. So I want to show you a quick demonstration on endpoint containment. This is one of the products from Mandiant, and it's the HX product, the endpoint product. And what we see here is that FireEye, as a platform, has passed intelligence to the HX platform. We see two threats that HX has learned about because FireEye did the virtual execution and found an unknown threat. Now HX knows about that unknown threat. Oh, let me log in. And what we want to do is we want to stop the attacker from doing the things that I showed you in the first demo. Well, here's our victim machine. And you can see there's a ping, an active ping running on our victim. The host endpoint solution allows for containment. So I'm going to select the machine which I know is infected because HX has told me it's infected, and I'm going to do a containment operation on it. And the containment is like cutting the network cable on the victim machine. If we cut the network cable, there's no communication between the endpoint and the rest of the world, including the attacker. And if the attacker doesn't have a network connection to the endpoint, he can't steal data. He can't look at the screen. He can't capture passwords. So you can see the containment has taken place on the endpoint. We've gotten a notification on the endpoint that says FireEye has detected a threat. We can customize this notice. And now if we look, we can see the pings have stopped. We've cut the network. If we go back to the attacker, pardon me. If we go back to the attacker and try and do a screen capture, nothing happens. There's no network connection. The threat has been mitigated. Right? So this is a big part now of FireEye's story. We're able to do virtual execution, detonation, inside the network perimeter and share that information with the endpoint and allow containment on the endpoint. Okay, I think I just have 2 or 3 minutes left, so let me come back to the slides and finish. So I want to talk a little bit about FireEye as a company. FireEye is helping companies in almost every vertical. We saw in the first video we played, whether it be government, FSI, enterprise, high-tech, oil and gas, all of these companies have digital assets. All of those digital assets are very high in value and are targets of attackers. FireEye can help. If you dig down into any one of those verticals, FireEye is in at least the top 5 out of 10 companies in that industry. Of course, we've won numerous accolades and awards over the recent years, not the least of which to mention we were ranked the 4th fastest growing in 2012, The 2013 report just came out, and we were the first fastest growing network and communications company. So I just want to leave you with one thought. If you remember one thing from this presentation today, it's that as you're building your security defenses, think about the solutions you're buying and ask yourself, are they pattern matching signature-based solutions? And in my environment, do I have anything like VM-based execution, right, to defend against these advanced attacks? Pattern matching served us well for a long time. It did a good job. But as time has progressed, its effectiveness is decreasing. We need to find something new. So as you build out your environments, think very hard about virtual machine-based execution. I just want to leave you with a slide of some of the customers that have come to FireEye for help with advanced threats and APTs. And with that, I'll wrap up. Are there any questions? I know we'll have smaller breakout sessions, and of course we can answer questions there, but would anyone like to ask a question on this presentation? Okay, well, thank you very much for your time and attendance. Appreciate it. 감사합니다.